Hey Barry, looks
Howdy.
like you're still on mute. Okay, there you are.
Let's see what happened to my video. There it is. Or there it isn't. Why is, oh, there it is.
Yeah. All right.
But it didn't come on.
Thanks for coming to the inaugural new session.
Oh, yes.
I'm thinking about a name for this. This is one of the first things I wanted to talk about. And then I have a few ways that I think I would like this structured and that will then either weed out people or, give people some reason to think it might be different.
Do you have any candidate names on a list yet?
I have one or two, yes. There's Stacy. All right. Cool. Stacy, welcome to this new session inauguration, whatever we're going to call it. And I have a couple of suggestions for names. But I also wanted to tell you I'm looking for some structure, and I have some proposed notes on structure. So that's what I wanted to put on the table today.
So that means we'll create yet a third group messenger chat just for the Sunday session.
Yeah, I will.
Use the
There'll be a
existing
different,
Saturday session.
different forum for that. In fact, it's not going to be a Facebook Messenger chat. I'm actually going to strongly prefer Zulip for it.
Zulip. Oh, yeah, I was thinking maybe because I haven't been on Zulip now for several months. We haven't been using it, I don't think.
Yeah.
I haven't.
But every time I use Facebook Messenger or some other thing, I mean, Slack would be nice, but Slack costs money after 10,000 messages. So Zulip is kind of like the response to Slack for people who want to do their own free thing. But the hosted version of Zulip is actually not free. The reason we're using it for free is because I applied for a free sponsored account and they said, yes, this is a worthwhile thing. So now we're able to use it for free. That's why.
Is that going to be indefinite, or are they going to eventually pull the complimentary plug on you?
As long as we still, I think, adhere to what I said GCC was, I don't think they're going to have a problem. Plus, we're not, abusing it in any way.
That's true. We have very little traffic on it.
Right. So, as I recall, you two were the only people who indicated interest in continuing this. So,
I think Heiner said he would like to come.
What? Who said?
I think Heiner, I'm pretty sure Heiner yesterday says he's going to try to come if he doesn't have any conflicts. We'll see. Whoa. He was certainly interested.
I'm coming for curiosity because I don't even know what this is. So we certainly can't pick a name for it yet.
I am proposing a name for it. And I think you'll see why here. Okay, so here's the context, right? So we've been doing 5.5 years of this GCC conversation, and every once in a while somebody, including Barry, okay, and I don't take offense at this, comes by and says, you guys haven't done anything in 5.5 years or 3 years or 2 years or whatever it is, okay? And I keep saying, well, I actually do see a long-term arc, and I see some direction. I see that we've come up with things like focus, and we've come up with things like shared memory being valuable, and we come up with co-visioning being valuable, and all these sort of things. So rather than just saying, oh, these are all things that are things we've done, I'd like to actually apply a lot of these ideas. Okay. My first choice, it probably is bad to lead with first choice because it never sounds right. So rather than starting with a name, I'd rather start, if you guys are willing to humor me a little bit, with the proposed structure that I'd like to see of this, okay? And this may drive you away. This may actually say, hey, maybe we're starting to do what we say we're gonna do. But anyway, these are some thoughts. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. So first idea is that, just as I said, I'm trying to apply some of these memes, these memetic memes, not like the Facebook memes, that have been going on for the last 5.5 years that we haven't seemed to be able to create agreements around. Okay. But now I would like to suggest a way to get agreements around them and then proceed. So that's why I'm calling it in my mind right now, applied collaborology. Okay. Now that may not make a lot of sense to you right now, but let me show you why I think it is meaningful and important to me. And I could end up here all by myself, which I think is fine. But this is why I think I want to do this. Now I'm trying to find my notes for where I put this, because I took extensive notes. And where are they?
So what you're saying is that terms of engagement are going to be an agreement that everybody subscribes to, consents to. Is that right?
I'm not going to require that everybody subscribes to, but we are going to recognize people's alignment with certain protocols and guidelines. Okay. And people can disagree with them, in my opinion. That's okay. But if they're disruptive, then we'll ask them to not be disruptive. Okay. And if it's a repeating occurrence,
they can tolerate them even if they don't subscribe to them, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. Right.
But don't violate them. Don't violate them, but tolerate them against under protest, I guess.
Right. So I'm trying to go after minimum viable structure to begin with and then build from there. Okay. But I don't want disruptive behavior. Okay.
Yeah.
And we can all agree to discuss what disruptive behavior means. But since we actually have appreciated focus, we've appreciated time that people spend together, we've appreciated shared memory. Those are things that I would like to see valued and therefore respected and enhanced. So things that prevent that from happening would be what I would call disruptive behavior. Okay. Okay. Let me.
I wonder if Socrates would have been considered a disruptive individual or Galileo.
Okay. So where are my notes here? Oh, here we go. New format. I call it new format. Okay. All right. All right. So in this new role, I have stated in the last 5.5 years that I've waited to see whether or not a group of independent, equal, egalitarian forum of people can emerge something, okay? And after 5.5 years, my assessment has been, it's been extremely difficult and way slower than it could otherwise have been.
Right.
So I am dropping the requirement that everybody be equal. I think that was an interesting experiment, but I am now dropping it. I think people can now take what I'm calling micro leadership roles. In other words, if you have a good idea, be the proponent of that good idea. Be the quote unquote person who leads that idea into discussion. Be the person who leads discussion around that good idea. So that's what I mean by micro leadership. Okay. So the first example of that is me proposing a minimum viable structure to this. Okay. Not mandate, stimulate, not mandate, and encourage improvement in whatever is actually being discussed. Okay. Without bashing, without getting personal attacks, but just focusing on the ideas, trying to improve them for the good of ourselves and those we're trying to serve. So that's the notion of micro leadership. Okay. That's idea probably number 2. Okay. Second, I've been hinting around, and I think we all kind of agree that agreements are necessary for collaboration. And we haven't really been able to establish formal agreements in other forums here for multiple reasons. So I am suggesting that in this particular forum, we actually make agreements and we start utilizing the RFC, the request for comment protocol. And I can go deeper into that, but basically it's, propose, discuss, improve, get explicit, and then wait a certain period of time for discussion to die down. And then it's adopted. Unless somebody still vehemently disagrees, in which case we now fork it. Okay. There will be a case in which it does apply. There will be cases in which it doesn't apply. and we'll go further into those details, okay? Or it could also say, hey, since 90% of people actually do agree and these 5 or 10% don't, maybe those 5 or 10% go and create a subgroup of some kind, okay? But I'm trying to make sure that we do have explicit agreements, they're written down, and they're improvable, and they're being practiced. So agreements is a key foundation of this via the RFC process. I'm saying the RFC process because it's worked to create the internet, okay? And it's not extremely formal. There is a protocol to it. And since it's worked, I'd like to adopt it, okay? Okay, the next one is this idea about how we conduct ourselves. So we've tried experiments in the past about, what do you think you're doing here? How are you going to conduct yourself? Are you going to interrupt people? Are you going to think before you talk? Are you going to control your triggers? Are you going to help people, who seem triggered? All these sort of things. And there's over 90 plus of these things, okay? Now, that's been partially successful because maybe about a dozen people have responded to that and included their own input to that. I would like to use that as a starting point and start saying, okay, those of us who are here, including those of us who may eventually come, will all work together to improve that and then codify that, okay? So I'm not using that spreadsheet as the starting point for what we do. I'm using that as a starting point for discussion. And then over time, certain ones of these behaviors will be elevated because we all think they're valuable. And then we will actually include those now in a code of conduct. We can call it whatever you want, rules of engagement, charter, code of conduct, whatever. In GitHub, by the way those collaboration communities engage, they call them codes of conduct. And I think they're actually quite successful. And by the way, all of those groups choose differently their codes of conduct. Many of them use a standard template, but many of them do customize it themselves for their own purposes. So this is not pulling something off the shelf and saying, we got to do that. I'm saying we got to figure out what works for us. So that's the behaviors piece of it, okay? Then the next key piece for me is shared group memory. And on this one, I'm going to go back to the 9 artifacts piece that I used to really mention more frequently. And let me just restate for the record that in order to kickstart or to structure a team, here are the 9 things I find very useful, okay? This is not theoretical. This is mostly just based on practice. One is a contacts list, a list of people, how you get in touch with them, and if useful, what their role is, why they're here, and what they think they can contribute. That's the first thing. Second is the glossary and terms. What words, terms, phrases do we use, and the multiple different definitions people may have on them. You've all heard this before. And then how do we then understand that when we're talking in this context, we're using this notion of that term, and we're talking in that context, we're using this notion of that term, and that's entirely explicit, and we can actually proceed because we don't have those ambiguities and disagreements. And if there is, then we say, well, is it due to a misunderstanding on this term? And if so, let's add that, okay? So that's the glossary and terms idea. It's the bare rudimentary start to what I'm calling Dictopedia, but it's a start, okay? Okay, the third is the project charter, which is what are we here for and how are we gonna do this, okay? So that I think encompasses both the co-visioning piece as well as the code of conduct. So I talked about code of conduct already earlier, but the co-visioning piece is what we've fostered with everybody by saying, we've asked everybody, why are you here in GCC? What does GCC mean to you? We've done the survey. People have responded to the survey. Everybody's been given an opportunity to write blogs or to create content around it. And I, in particular, have written up something that I'm calling the 6 pillars of what I consider GCC is. So all of that content, I'm hoping to bring together again so that we can actually co-create a charter. I'm not coming saying this is the charter. I'm suggesting that this is how we do it, okay? Now, if you'd rather do something very different, go ahead and create a forum for that, okay? But this is my interest. I'm just stating what my interest is for using this time and opportunity. Okay, so that's the third piece, which is the charter. Okay, 3 out of 9. Fourth is the actual code of conduct. I mentioned that again earlier. Fifth is the chronologue. It's a part of the shared group memory. Chronologue says, what have we done? And where's the record? And how do we find it? Okay. It's different from calendar, which is coming up, which is another one of the 9 things, which is what is coming up in the future and how are we planning for that? Okay. You can both use calendars for both, but they're very, very different use cases. Okay. So there is a chronologue. And right now, I believe we're currently using, not well, but we've got a Google Calendar, we've got Zulip, we've got people's personal blogs and knowledge repositories, and we have YouTube. Okay. So that's at least a component of the chronologue. There is a skeletal website, but I don't think we've been updating it recently. So we could put that in the list if you like, but that's what I consider a chronologue. What have we done? How do we find it? How do we know what we've done? How do we share what we've done? Okay, so the calendar is the next piece of this, which is what are we gonna do? And how do we plan around that, as I mentioned, okay? And by the way, Google Calendar has been set up for GCC, and we've said before how you get access to it or put things into it. We can do that again, okay, if you like. So that's the upcoming stuff, okay? So together they comprise, 2 sides of that timeline. The next one is something I call an action item tracking system, which is when we say we're going to do something, how do we make that explicit? How does everybody get visibility into it? How do we know that there's status on it? And I had originally, many years ago, a few years ago, suggested we use Trello, okay? I'm willing to do that, but my recent decision to use GitHub suggests that GitHub issues may also be, it's a specific name to a specific set of features, might be a good way to handle action items. So in other words, if I say, hey, Barry, I'm going to send you this paper on XYZ, and I don't immediately send it to you, basically I'm recommending the protocol be, let's put that action, not as a record in the actual meeting, it should be there, okay, but not the only place. The place where it actually can get visible and actually seen as an action item is this action item tracking system. So we decide it's either Trello, which is simple, or we use GitHub Actions, GitHub Issues, or we pick something else. Another viable thing is something called Asana, A-S-A-N-A, a little bit more complicated than Trello, okay? GitHub Issues is a little bit more complicated than Trello. So if we're going after the simplest possible thing, Trello is probably it, okay? So I'm willing to use it for that reason, but I was just thinking that if it were used in conjunction with the GitHub, which is my place for publishing these new practices, it might have been nice for its action item tracking system to be considered, okay? The next one, number 8, is a place called references. In other words, when we're learning about the world and what the world is doing, and we have the link to the Global Challenges Foundation, and we have links to EOST, and we have links to books, and we have links to Barry's blogs, and we have links to whatever, okay? Stuff that is relevant and useful for us when we're doing what we're doing. I'm calling that references. You could call it a library. You could call it a list of bookmarks. You could call it whatever, okay? So I'm saying for now, because we don't have global agreement, I'm suggesting that people put those in their own PKRs, their own personal knowledge repositories. And over time, we can decide where we want to put this. The library for GCC. Yeah, not the Alexandria library, but GCC library, okay? And then the 9th item, number 9 on my list of 9, is what I'm calling the conversation space. In the conversation space, I've said before, I prefer places that are threadable and where each utterance can be linkable, okay? And Facebook Messenger doesn't seem to be that. And Facebook itself doesn't appear to be that. So we have tried Zulip before. Slack is also a viable thing, but like I said, you'd have to pay for that over time. So right now, I think the place that I've found that satisfies that, there's two. One is something called Mattermost, and the other is called Zulip. Okay, and I'd rather just stick with something that's already been introduced, because introducing something new is always an obstacle, it appears. But I'm open to using either of them because we can get those and scale them out for free. I think they're both open source and we have free ways to utilize them. Okay, so that's a big idea, but that big idea was follow the 9 artifacts idea, so that we can get shared memory, we can get direction, we can get the chronologue set up so we can find things, we can share things with each other. That is that following piece. Okay, here's the next one. And this involves membership. This is where it gets a little bit dicey and probably going to get some feedback. Okay, I'm recognizing that there are probably 4 categories of people here. Okay, one category, and let's not name them, but I'm just going to say what they are, is people who agree to these guidelines. And they're embracing, and where they disagree, we engage, we improve, and we move forward. Okay, so that's the first group of people. Second people are the people who agree to adhere to these guidelines, but their adherence is inconsistent. We can see that on occasion, it's not really going with what we've agreed. And rather than bringing it up as an improvement, they just decide to not adhere. Okay, so that's another category. Okay, the third is a category of people who don't state that they agree, but they behave like they do. So in other words, they're not saying I agree, but they're practicing what we're actually, creating here in minimum viable structure. Okay. Then the fourth group here are the people who do not agree with those guidelines, and there's not good adherence. So I'm saying over time, it's probably these people who will probably be somewhat disruptive. And that's the group that I would probably keep a careful eye on. Okay. So I'm not saying there's any way right now that I'm proposing to weed people out or to, admonish people or do anything, but I'm just looking for people who are willing to examine their own behavior and willing to be accountable for what we are trying to co-create here, which is the minimum viable structure, where we can actually get things done and show people that there is movement, develop ideas, co-create ideas, do some co-visioning, do some collaborology, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. So just to finish up that discussion on membership, I would say disruption, if it's just once in a while, is not a problem. Okay. We can probably handle that with discussion and improvement. If it's more than once and we see that it's going to be a problem, then I think we will probably have to address the removal issue. Okay. Now, the reason I think this is necessary is because I've always been a proponent of saying we are trying to do things for the entire planet. We are trying to do things for 8 billion people. That does not mean that all 8 billion people have to be part of this conversation. Okay. Just like when you're actually trying to create a governance system for any other group. Okay. People who are constantly disruptive towards that constitution, they're not invited to the game. They are disruptors. They are trying to subvert that process. So even though we're trying to co-create a system in a world that recognizes there are such people, those people do not have to be invited to these conversations. One of the very first things I keep saying about collaborology and what I learned about it is you don't have to collaborate with everybody. It's not necessary. Okay? It many times is a waste of time, so long as there has been an attempt to do so and you understand what is preventing a positive collaboration to happen. Okay. All right. So that has been how many minutes? About 20 minutes or so. That is my minimum viable structure as I see it right now. So I will pause and hear some feedback.
I'm waiting to see if Stacy wants to go first.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So it come as no surprise that my own experience in this kind of organization is I've had experience with what I call the social contract governance model, and I've got existence proof that it can work. It's not foolproof, and it has to resolve a lot of the same issues, the code of conduct or the mutually agreeable terms of engagement, conflict resolution, identifying the shared values, the current set or evolving set of shared goals or objectives, things you're going to try to do in some time frame, the methods that you're going to end up employing to reach your objectives. Let's see, what am I leaving out? So that's one model. So that's the model that I know about, and I think it's consistent with what Sam is proposing. It may not be, mathematically identical, but it has a lot of overlapping features and components. And I know that it has real life examples. I think the Linux community, or maybe not, maybe one of the subsets of them, I forget which one, actually has a written social contract. The version of Linux begins with a G, forgetting its name now.
Are you talking about the GNU Foundation?
No, not the GNU Foundation. The what? Debian. Debian. I think the Debian project has an express social contract. So that's an example. In the early days of Google, there was a social contract that embraced the rights and responsibilities of the employees of Google. I don't know if they still have that, but at least they had it for a while at the beginning. And of course, the projects that I worked on back in the 90s were social contract communities, and we had written social contracts, of which the written examples can still be read. They're still online, even though the communities are now ghost towns. So, and we have little write-ups of experiences with that model, of where they worked well and where we had to deal with issues like disruptive conflicts and kicking people out, things like that. So basically, I think it's realistic, but I do know what some of the challenges are: conflict resolution, what you do, what happens when you depart from the protocols, and what happens if you have somebody who simply doesn't belong, and how do you do the gatekeeping function in a fair way, not just a fair way.
Throw money in there.
Sorry?
Throw money in there. That's a whole category of things that are going to happen.
Yeah,
and also assets and liabilities.
Yeah, and also in the process of gatekeeping, is it an educational experience for all the parties, including the one who's getting kicked out? Try to make it as educational, as enlightening, even if it's corrective in the sense that somebody is not at the level of maturity to adhere to the terms of engagement or the protocols or whatever, not to alienate them beyond the point where they become an enemy. Just say, you're not ready for us yet, So that's my comment. I mean, that's a little bit spitballing off the top of my head, but that's basically where I'm going to be coming from.
Good. Stacy, Josh?
I have nothing to add at this time.
Shall I not call on you, Stacy, because you said you wanted to be an observer? Because I want to respect your presence here.
Oh, no, you can call on me. I'm just, the things, so two quick things. One, it's such a slight thing, but it just goes towards my wanting to always weave together.
Wanted what?
Of
I dropped that
everything that
right
I
there.
picked up. Pete Kaminsky has changed the idea. I like to weave together when I pick up things elsewhere. I like to bring it. If you want to accept it, you don't have to. Very small point. Pete Kaminsky has changed request for comment to request for guidance. And it seems to be something that a lot really embraced. So I can get you the detailed explanation of why you do that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I did want to share that. And the other thing is I just wanted to say that I use Mattermost a lot of if you were there, just simply because I'm there and I'm going to be more likely to contribute.
Did
That's
you
it.
say Matter?
Mattermost.
It's a conversation space platform.
Oh, that's the name. Okay, yeah, it's just an unfamiliar label to me.
Have you used
It's a
Slack?
specific
Eric?
management tool or conversation tool?
Yeah.
No.
These tools are very much like Slack because Slack was kind of like the very first successful.
I have used, what was it? Buffalo? No, that's not the word you
He
said.
said it was successful platform.
Platform, okay. Even Otter couldn't figure out what that word was.
Yeah, I'm willing to do Mattermost.
I'm
It's
better than
actually a
Otter.
free service. It's fine. I would have to try and migrate some of the content because we did try for several weeks and months, and I continued to post updates to Zulip, although probably many people don't see them. So I'll try and see if I can migrate some to Mattermost and how difficult that is if we are not willing to use Zulip.
I didn't say I wasn't willing. I'm just throwing that out.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So I hear weave together, utilize Pete Kaminsky's change from RFCs to RFGs. I'll look into that and why that happened. Reason I think right now I know RFCs because it's widely known. It's been in existence since the beginning of the internet. And RFGs, I'll have to figure out what the small delta is on that one.
And again, I think we're coming from the point of whatever we've known, aren't we looking to create something slightly different?
Yes,
Because
we're trying to
whatever's-
improve. Yes, that's why I said I would, but I'm not going to just say, "Oh, yes, let's do it," without
No,
understanding.
no, sure. I will get you the longer explanation.
Yeah, like, is there a video of a session where that was being discussed?
Yes,
Okay, that'd be an excellent resource.
I'm going to try, which brings me to my point about Colin's tool. What's happening? Because it would be really helpful if I had that to be able to use.
No public
Reach out
user
to Colin.
interface yet.
I
Well-
have the last time I reached out to him, he said he had a few more hours work on it, but he was too busy to do it at the time. And maybe that's something that's worth looking for some money for. I don't know.
Yeah, the absence of a public user interface is a real serious issue. You can't just go to him and ask him to do all the lookups for you. That's unrealistic.
Well, let me also suggest, I believe everybody's got access to the folder where all the notes files are, all the 500 or 600 notes files are. In the folder itself, if you're using Google Drive, you can say search and it'll search the contents of that folder. It's not as clean as what Colin has built, but it does exist. So if you're looking for the word smart people problem, you could probably find it. If you're looking for the word Kaminsky, you could probably find it.
But would can I do that through YouTube? Like, I don't understand where I would go to do that.
The reason I'm suggesting it is because each of those notes files is what's produced by YouTube transcription services for each video session.
But
So in
that
other words,
works.
if you find a hit in one
Content.
file, it'll probably be in the transcription of that particular session, and it'll have a time tag. Now, you can't click the link and go directly to YouTube, but you could directly yourself type in YouTube into your browser and then look for that particular time tag and then view whatever was there. So it's not as seamless.
But what I'm
But-
saying is, what happens if it's not GCC content that I'm trying to go through?
Then you'd have to figure out whether that content was indexed somewhere.
Got it.
And by the way, Colin's tool only, I believe, indexes the GCC videos in that playlist. That's what I understood.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right, but I would assume that if somebody else had an index, that tool would know, that tool wouldn't work if you brought it to another.
No,
Library.
index formats are very, very specific. And I doubt that Colin has had the time to make it that abstract and
Oh,
that
okay.
general.
All right, so yeah, this I don't understand, so, okay.
Okay?
Yep.
More feedback? Okay, Josh, any feedback?
I'll say he had to step away.
Yeah, it looks like he's not in attendance.
Okay. So that's what I wanted to do for today. Now, let's talk about duration of sessions. I don't have a hard alignment with 2-hour sessions. I think what I would like is kind of like from session to session, understand what the next step is. And that next step then says, okay, how much time do we really need for it? And are we going to, stay until it's done, or are we going to conduct ourselves otherwise? So my sole express purpose today was to lay out the minimum viable structure for this new thing that I'm calling, and therefore explain why right now I'm thinking about the name being applied collaborology. Now, it is not a term that anybody out there would instantly recognize. Okay, so it has its pluses and minuses. Right.
Otter doesn't know it either.
That's right. Collaborology.
There, I got it.
Hey, got it. Look at that. Anyway, so my next step. Actually, I did ask a couple of questions. I'm open on some of these 9 artifacts ideas. I did say that we could either use Trello, which is simple, and we already pretty much all have access to it already, or we migrate to something else. And in retrospect, I'm thinking, let's just stick with Trello since everybody's already got an account there. Okay. So I'm going to put some content into Trello. I'm going to write up these notes. I'm going to put it into Zulip. Actually, Barry, you already have Zulip access, right? Do you have Mattermost access?
Yeah, I have account on Zulip, but I never heard of Mattermost until just now.
Okay.
Do
So,
Zulip then.
What? Stacy, you said?
Do Zulip then, if we're all there.
All right. I'm going to put notes in here. I'm going to create a new channel in Zulip called Applied Collaborology. And that's where I'm going to put things. Okay. I'm going to put the link to the video in there once I upload it. And I'll try and follow the same notes files format that I've been using for GCC. And hopefully it'll go from there. And then we can start collaborating on what we would like to write down as the focus areas. To me, co-visioning is one. You bring up an excellent one, Barry, which is conflict resolution, which is part of what I call coexistence. I think it's part of that coexistence idea.
Compatibility.
Yeah.
We're dealing with incompatibility.
Yeah. I think the agreements focus, the shared group memory focus, those are all key pieces that I think we could work on together. And if we have 2 or 3 active members, I think that's perfectly fine. In fact, I love this talk in groups of 3 idea, but I'm not going to dissuade others to do it either. But while we have 3 active members, I think that's a rare opportunity because magic things happen in 3s, in my experience.
Yeah. Partnerships of 2 or 3.
Yeah.
The more people, the more the partnership is likely to schism at some point.
Yeah.
Or somebody just doesn't carry their weight.
Yeah. So I have a contacts list that I created years ago. I'm going to prune it. I'm going to just keep it to the 3 or 4 active people right now. It can grow from there, but it's a start. Okay. I have a glossary, which I think I'm just going to link to because it's got many terms, not all, probably only 10 or 15% of all the terms that should be in there, but it's there and I'll link to that. Okay. I will reshare the Google Calendar and how you guys can, utilize it as read-only, or you can actually put things into it. And I'm going to start this set of activities on Sundays. I'll put that in the calendar. Okay. I will propose those focus areas, and that's going to be a start for next. So I'm proposing that next week we talk about focus areas. Okay. Stacy, if you'll send me that link on RFGs, I'll go study the RFGs. And,
I have to look for it.
Right.
It might be in a call, so I have to go through the transcripts.
Then I'll create this thing in Zulip, as we said. I will start a brand new Trello And then we could actually selectively migrate from other Trello boards, but this will be a brand new Trello board. And I'm not going to talk about references for now. And we're going to try Zulip as a conversation space. Okay. I noticed that there's not great enthusiasm on this applied collaborology name. Why don't we talk about names next week also? Come up with what you think might be a good thing. Don't need to come up with it right away, but propose some things, and then we'll talk about pros and cons. Okay, and that's a crisp 40 minutes. Now that was my planned part here. Oh, let me not forget this one thing. Do you guys understand what I mean by micro leadership? In other words,
I think
there's no power. So,
I
He
think
said he
so.
thinks so.
I think so. I mean, I have a concept of what it means. It might not exactly align with your idea, but close
Right.
enough.
Right. Okay. So we'll evolve that. I'll put that into the Dictopedia, and everybody has the opportunity to do it and propose ideas in the RFC or RFG process, and help co-create and co-improve what we're trying to do here. Propose, not mandate. Stimulate, not mandate.
Suggest.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
Coerce.
those are my notes. Oh, there's a small wrinkle to the RFC process. Okay, so this might be a wrinkle we'd have to fold in with the RFG process. The RFCs look like they're a one-step process. In actuality, I think they can take a two-step process. Hey, Kayla. Hey, since Kayla arrived, would someone, Barry, you or Stacy, like to summarize for Kayla? Because I've been doing a lot of talking. Would one of you like to summarize what you heard from me, and let's see how it landed for each of you? Would that be okay?
I can't do it, but I'm looking for what you asked me for.
Okay.
I can't summarize.
So Sam would like to start a new Sunday project that's more organized than our traditional sessions, with specific, this is my paraphrase or my version of it, specific values that we all subscribe to, specific objectives or goals within the direction of our values, and some protocols or codes of conduct or terms of engagement that we all agree to abide by, some protocols, so that we can function without getting discombobulated and sidetracked and into arguments. And some tools to keep track of all of our conversations, some online tools like GitHub, one that Sam mentioned called ASUN, I can't remember the name, something like
Asana.
that.
Asana.
Zulip, calendar, some way of keeping a record of what we have come up with and agreed to, so we can find the record and keep track of ourselves. So beyond that, Sam hasn't specifically suggested a particular objective or goal that we're all going to work toward, but it's going to be within some set of shared values and realistic commitments that we can make.
Right.
Do
I
whatever we
wasn't going
decide
to
to
come
do.
and mandate any of that. Thanks, Barry. I wasn't going to come and mandate. I was suggesting that next week we have two areas of focus. One, which is, what would you propose be our areas of focus for this thing? And then two, a proposed name. Okay. Now, is it okay if I do like a 3-minute summary for Kayla?
Sure.
So we'll just get on the record here. Okay. All right. So Kayla, I'm going to blast through this, and you can ask questions at any time, but let me blast through this quickly so I don't bore Barry and Stacy and Josh. Okay. One, I observed in the last 5.5 years that just expecting everybody to be equal and then seeing things emerge hasn't seemed to work the way I thought it would. So I'm introducing this notion of micro leadership. So micro leadership means anybody can bring a good idea. And then this RFC process, the request for comments process, can be a way that we actually take that idea and essentially embrace it after some discussion. Okay. I would like for our code of conduct to become acknowledged. So I'm going back to the spreadsheet that we used to have and not use it verbatim, but sort of sift through it and pick out those pieces that we want to have in a code of conduct or look elsewhere. Okay, so that'll be an evolving thing, but that is something that we'll have as one of our artifacts. Okay, I want to value shared group memory. And so you've heard this before. So where each of us has something to write, I'm encouraging everybody to blog on their own and put it wherever they want to, okay? And link to everybody else's, okay? This is not a new idea. And over time, we can then see what's really emerging as a good space to put this, okay? I'm specifically going to follow my own thoughts on this 9 artifacts idea. So I'm going to create it. There's a contacts list that already exists. I'm going to prune it and I'm going to share it. That's artifact number 1. Artifact number 2 is a glossary of terms. Those are the definitions and opportunities for merging or differentiating between definitions in different contexts. Number 3 is a project charter, which is the focus areas and why we exist, okay? Number 4 is the rules of engagement, otherwise known as the code of conduct. Number 5 is the chronologue, a basically place, a shared group memory place that says, what have we done? And how do we share it with people, etc. The other is, again, timeline based, but it's a calendar. What is it that we're gonna do? That's future looking, okay? So the chronologue is backward looking, calendar is forward looking. As we make agreements, there will be an action item tracking system that'll actually, make explicit and visible all of the action items that we've agreed to undertake. And for now, because it's simple and most of us already have access to it, I'm proposing we use Trello. The 8th item is something I'm calling references, just basically collateral that assists and is relevant to what we do. Like a library, like a book stack, like a set of bookmarks, okay? That's the references idea. We call it library if we want. And then the 9th is a conversation space. And because of limitations I've felt were in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook Messenger, I'm proposing we retry Zulip. So I will put all my updates in Zulip. And probably not gonna do much in this thread on Facebook. Okay. I may put an announcement here or there, but I'm not going to carry on detailed interaction on Facebook or Facebook Messenger. Okay. That is a platform I think is devolving. Okay. The next idea I proposed was levels of participation. And I'm basically identifying 4 groups of people. Those who agree to these guidelines and help want to co-create these guidelines and are fully aligned with it, that's group number 1. Group number 2, people who agree, but whose adherence to these guidelines is inconsistent, okay? So we'll have to sort of work on how to improve that. Number 3 are those group of people who do not say they're going to agree to these guidelines, but their behavior pretty much suggests that they do adhere, okay? Then number 4 are those people who do not adhere to these guidelines and their behavior shows that they're not really adhering to it. And those are potential disruptors. And that's a whole category of things where we then have to talk about, hey, is it okay? Is it an opportunity for us and them to learn? Or are they too disruptive and we want to actually do something about that, okay? So those are my minimum viable structure creating proposals for this new forum, which I'm, at least for now, using a working name of Applied Collaborology. Kayla, you used to be a part of a thing I used to call the Collaborology Study Group. So you may actually see where I'm trying to go with this. Okay. Okay, so that's my end of my long recap of, it probably took more than 3 minutes, but that sort of brings you up to speed, I think, Kayla. Any feedback on that?
Okay. No. I like to just listen and figure it out as they go.
Okay, cool. And since this is the inaugural session of this thing, I just want to lay out this minimum viable structure, and then I will write it up this week. And I'm proposing that next week, again, we focus on focus areas, when we focus on possible name. Okay, so unless you have other feedback, I'm done with this section of my prepared notes. Should I have a gavel? Bang. Adjourned. Unless you guys have any other topics to talk about. Like I said, I said this earlier. I don't have a love for 2-hour sessions. I don't have a love for 10-minute sessions. I think this forum, I'm hoping, will be more topic and agenda and focus driven. So if there isn't focus, then it becomes non-focused. We again can do whatever you want, okay? But the focus part of it, the applied collaborology part of it, I would like to have be around focus, certain topics. We can keep a backlog, by the way. It's entirely legitimate of things that we still have yet to talk about. And that's quite an important thing there also. Part of our group shared memory. But the random, everybody talks, that's a different forum. That's still the Saturday thing, which I haven't been able to really bring structure to adequately. So that's why I'm trying this.
One thing that I would love to see in a charter or code of conduct or terms of engagement is a clause that says that we strive to devise ethical best practices for ourselves and for our community. But that's an express goal, to get to ethical best practices as best we can, and to learn how to improve ourselves when we depart from them.
Improve. The last part I didn't hear.
Improve ourselves when we depart from them, from the ethical.
I like that.
I think that's an important learning objective for humankind, not just individuals, but our whole species. We have a long journey ahead of us in developing ethical best practices for individuals and for governance systems. Governance systems are falling way short of ethical best practices, and that conceivably could cause the collapse of governance systems as we have known them and have in the past.
Yep. Oh, it probably went without being said, but one thing I'm kind of grandfathering in from GCC is these sessions will be recorded and shared.
Yes.
Okay.
So fine, no problem.
All right. Okay. I like that. In fact, our recent conversation around analytic theology, whatever we're saying there about the calculus of ethics, I can sort of see in my own mind how that comes together. And I'd love to have that thread. So if we work it in as part of this, I think it's very, very, very good.
Good.
It could end up being a crucial component of collaborology itself.
Yeah, I was rather chagrined to learn that even people who had taken college level religious studies courses did not have a module on ethics in their own religious studies at the college level. And that kind of blew my mind to learn that.
Well, ethics has been introduced as these guidelines that you're just learning almost verbatim with memory, but there's no foundation that's been presented usually when it comes to ethical practices. But if you think systemically, if you look at what happens if these quote unquote ethical systems interact, then you can see what happens, if you put them into practice. You can see whether they generate a system that goes awry, or you can see whether or not they actually bring about some stability and peace and justice or whatever. So I think all of that is valid.
Yeah.
That foundation of why these ethical practices are taught or have been derived.
And the kind of thinking that goes into that kind of analysis, I mentioned before that Howard Gardner in his catalog of multiple intelligences only recently added that kind of thinking, and he called it existential thinking. And I said, I've always called that systems thinking. But yeah, it has so many diverse applications, and every application has a different aim. So religious thinking and existential thinking and sustainable thinking. There's a whole long list of synonyms for applications of existential thinking. But my observation is that from a secular point of view, it's systems thinking at the college level. And then at the theological side, it goes all the way back to the early theologians trying to figure out how to construct a model for conduct that we don't, go extinct, either as a tribe, as a species, or as a civilization, or as a nation. So yeah, there's a lot of people been using that kind of thinking in various different domains over thousands of years.
Stacy, you had your hand up, and then I have a response to Barry.
Go ahead and respond to him first so that you don't lose your thought.
So Barry, when you bring up the ninth intelligent or systems thinking and say, okay, well, that's analytic theology or that's something else, a similar response to you is that's systematic mathematical thinking. I know we've both made these points before in other sessions, but that's just a way to sort of look at the perspectives from which we each come to this topic.
Yeah. And it needs more mathematical grounding to be rigorous. In the past, it's lacked the mathematical grounding, so it's more been narrative and storycraft and allegories and parables, which are fine, but they don't have the rigor of mathematical reasoning, the precision thinking.
Have any of you watched the Isaac Asimov Foundation TV series that has been on Apple TV the last year?
No, I don't have Apple TV.
It is
Neither do
a
I.
significant departure from the books, but the key ideas I think are still there. And in Asimov's terms, his mathematics of social behavior and history, he calls psychohistory.
Yeah, I know that term. Yeah, psychohistory. The mathematics of how humans behave in terms of their psychological predilections.
Over large time frames and large bodies of people.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a more statistical examination.
And that's a huge frontier for psychology and sociology and philosophy and governance theories of how do you understand how humans behave so that you can manage human behavior in a constructive, sensible way that's not violent and not ineffective.
Yeah.
So now that ties into my comment, which I was hesitant to make before because it sounds very childish. But again, since Sam mentioned the magic of threes, I think having what I would call like a buddy system almost, but it's not a two-person buddy system, it's a three-person, is really helpful. So in any given situation, if I'm looking for guidance, I always come up with two people that I want specifically. And I think that if we can incorporate that into what we're doing, and those, those two buddies can change at any time. But I think we would learn a lot by looking at, well, first of all, by looking at the two that are being brought together. That gives a lot of useful information as well. And then the other thing I wanted to bring the threes into is when you were talking about micro leadership, because without two people willing to be part of that idea, there's nothing to be led. At least not in terms of collaborology.
In fact, that idea of threes is why when I have my community of impact one pager, the idea of perspectives is in threes.
Yeah.
Now, two people you really trust, who really trust you, so that they can actually help you grow and not, be wallowing in your own bullshit.
Yeah.
And to just expand on that, Barry and I were both typing at the same time your 9 artifacts. Until I was like almost done talking, but I decided to put it up there anyway, because even though they're basically saying the same thing, they're in 2 different ways, and some might be easier or, might draw one population.
Yep.
And I think that that's important too. And if there were 3, that would be even more beautiful. Maybe there's just a list 1, 2, 3. But yeah.
What Stacy calls the buddy system, I've always thought of as simply peer review. And in scientific research, your peer review begins with two close associates that you already know who will look for any mistakes that you've made and try to make sure you sharpen it up. And then after you've had the friendly peer review, then you publish it for public peer review. So that's sort of the cycle of peer review, which you,
Yep.
buddy system is sort of is one of that.
And I use buddy system for a reason. I am really drawn to bringing things down to where anybody would understand.
Right.
And it also, I think, will affect the power dynamics, because let's say, so you have, I'm a camp counselor, let's say. So I have my group of 3 and they all look out for themselves and, they make decisions, but then they report to me. So it's, there's that balance there, which peer review gets very confusing, especially to somebody that's never been part of a peer review group.
Right. And most people aren't scientists, so they don't engage in scientific peer review. It's a rarefied demographic, people who do professional science and professional peer review of fellow scientists.
You can further slice those people who do a review of their own accountability, their own behavior.
Yeah. And if you're autodidactic, how do you grade your own homework assignments?
You can't.
That's
It's the old
the
saying,
point.
kids, can't try this at home.
Right. Yeah.
So we are almost exactly at an hour. I think that's been, for me, a very, can't say good, because we haven't established what good is yet. But I found it aligned with what I came prepared to do. So in that respect, I am complete.
So I'd like to introduce something then to go. What about if together, while we're all here, we actually work on what the agenda for next week will be, so that we actually have a work product that we could put out so that anybody showing up for next week sees what's on the agenda. I'm not willing to lead that. I'm just willing to suggest it. But
I
if
was
two
about to
people,
say.
two people decide it's a good idea, then let's go.
Okay, so personally, I actually have a lot of other stuff to do today, so I'm not entirely able to spend 2 hours today. I thought 1 hour was good for me today.
Okay.
So if 2 or 3 of you would like to do that, by all means. I'm not right now available in real time to do it, but I will work on it during this week.
Okay. Now, if you want to leave the recording going while you have to leave, I'd be happy to move into a different phase, which is a more emotional one of why I would not be willing to do that, because I
Okay.
want to be able to share.
All right, let me stop the recording now.